stunning developments in South Korea, a vibrant democracy and critical U.S. ally thrown into chaos today after that nation's embattled president Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law. In a late-night address, cheers erupted in Seoul just over an hour ago after he caved to pressure from within his own party and lifted the martial law decree. Martial law in South Korea means all political activities and protests are immediately outlawed. It also means the banning of, quote, fake news and, quote, manipulating public opinion. In the surprise speech, conservative President Yoon accused the liberal opposition party of trying to, quote, overthrow the free democracy, and he suggested his rivals are aligned with North Korean communists. Right after Yoon's address, crowds swelled outside the parliament in Seoul. Security forces broke windows to enter the parliament as lawmakers rushed to get inside and strike down that decree, one that has not been instituted in 40 years. Now the White House, President Biden, on edge, caught by surprise by what's going on in this key ally. The United States' biggest international military base, with more than 40,000 Americans, is located in South Korea, of course, and that serves as a critical deterrent to the rogue regime of North Korea. Let's go right to CNN's Mike Valerio in Seoul. Mike, now that the order's been lifted, what happens?
Well, we're waiting to hear from President Yoon Suk-yeol, a conservative politician known in South Korea for years, a strong prosecutor who takes a hard line against North Korea. We're waiting to see what he says to the country, Jake, why he took us down this road, and what he can say to justify why he instituted martial law for the first time since 1980. Now, to set the scene, the tableau, we're just a couple of yards away from the National Assembly, the heart of government here in Seoul, where most of this saga went down after the president's announcement. Over my right-hand shoulder, we have a banner that says, "Now impeach Yoon Suk-yeol" in Korean. And then after we zoom in and show you that banner, let's come over to my left, and you can see, well before sunrise, Jake, we still have people, grandmas, kids, students, canceling work, canceling school, staying here in freezing temperatures, not going anywhere until President Yoon steps down. Bringing it back to America, Jake, as you mentioned, crucial for stability here in this country, where we have 28,500 service members. It grows well over that number if you include the military families and civilian personnel at Camp Humphreys, about 60 miles away, a 1-hour drive from North Korea, the United States' biggest military base overseas. This all happened, President Yoon saying that he was trying to fight North Korean and anti-state forces inside South Korea, but be it a grandma or member of the political class or reporters here, when we all watched that speech, we kind of said in a collective moment, Jake, what does he mean? Very few shreds of evidence given to why he declared martial law. It seems as though most of the military presence that lined the street has vanished. When we first got here, there were 2 green Humvees that were parked right in front of the National Assembly building. They've moved out. A whole cadre of police officers have also moved out. So now it's the question, how long is this guy going to stay in office? Will this president be impeached, a key U.S. ally? And where does this key democracy in Asia go from here, Jake?
All right, Mike Valerio in Seoul, South Korea. Thanks so much. The declaration in South Korea came as a complete surprise to much of the world, including the United States. CNN's Arlette Saenz is traveling with President Biden. And Arlette, from the brief statements, it does not sound as though anyone in Biden's orbit knew anything like this would unfold in South Korea today.
No, Jake, this really came as a complete surprise to President Biden and officials across the federal government. A National Security Council spokesperson said that the U.S. did not receive any advance notification of President Yoon's declaration of martial law, and officials across the government spent the days really scrambling, trying to figure out what exactly had happened here. Now, the U.S. government has been in touch with the South Korean government, and a State Department spokesperson this afternoon had said that the U.S. hope was that this would be resolved peacefully. But for President Biden's part, we have heard very little, almost nothing from him relating to this situation. After he delivered a speech at the National Museum of Slavery here in Angola this afternoon, the president briefly answered a reporter's question, saying that he was about to be briefed on the situation. The White House later confirmed that the president was briefed as he took his motorcade from that speech site to his hotel. But beyond that, we have yet to hear from President President Biden. It does come, as Mike was noting, the U.S. considers South Korea to be such a crucial ally. President Biden himself has spent a lot of time fostering that relationship, including directly with President Yoon. So it kind of highlights the tricky situation that the White House has been here throughout the course of the day. But it is a curious decision from the White House to not have President Biden comment in any way, especially when he has staked so much of his presidency on the need to preserve and protect democracy and democratic institutions at home and abroad.
All right, Arlette, thank you so much. Let's bring in a few more voices. Ken Choi is with us. He's the deputy managing editor for the Chosun daily newspaper in South Korea. Ken, it's just after 6 a.m. where you are. Many Koreans are just waking up to all this. Do you think the dramatic scenes might spawn even more protests throughout the day?
I think, yeah, there will probably some protests, but the city is waking up. Everything is just going as normal. I just looked out the window and the traffic is, the same as yesterday. So I think, the daily lives will go on, but after, President Yoon made such a shocking, declaration, I think he will have to face some very, very heavy political burden and some explanation because I don't think this is going to just go away.
And Ken, the president there is obviously extremely unpopular. He claimed that he declared martial law to somehow rein in power, but how? What did he gain from this move today?
Well, basically nothing. A lot of people are scratching their heads and questioning why did he really do it. I don't think there's any gain for him for doing this. I don't know whether he thought he could succeed in having this martial law declared and contain the parliament. But this is Korea is like 12th largest economy in the world. It's very advanced. Everybody's carrying mobile phones. It's almost impossible to quell anyone's freedom of speech or anyone's free political opinion. You can say this, you can say that. It's relatively very free country, and I don't think people would condone it if anyone is trying to suppress their political opinion. So it's a big question. I think the president has to explain today or tomorrow why he did it, and all the political repercussion will be coming at him. So we have to see.
MJ Lee is CNN's senior White House correspondent. She joins me in studio here. And President Biden has put a lot of effort into building this relationship with this South Korean president. When President Biden made his first visit to Asia a couple years ago, South Korea was one of his first stops. He hosted this president at the White House just last year. How might this impact U.S.-Korean relations? Trump obviously taking office in 48 days.
Yeah, you're right that strengthening U.S.-ROK relations has been a huge part of President Biden's foreign policy goals, all, of course, in the context of trying to contain China's influence in the region. It's actually one of the reasons why the Biden administration has been so set on helping to improve relations between Korea and Japan, obviously two countries with a long antagonistic history. Japan ruled Korea for a number of decades. It's less that there's, I think, necessarily been such great personal chemistry between the two men, but that the president has just had a lot of occasions to be with Yoon Suk-yeol. The trip that you mentioned back in 2022, the president himself then hosted Yoon for a state visit. Last year, there was also that Camp David trilat summit between U.S., Korea, and Japanese leaders. That was unprecedented. I think given all of that, we just have to see exactly how President Biden addresses this. As Arlette said, we've barely heard anything from the White House. Is there going to be some kind of personal condemnation of Yoon? I know for a certainty that he will say in some form or fashion that the U.S.-South Korea relationship remains ironclad. He will likely say to some effect that despite what happened over the last 24 hours, that is an alliance and a relationship that is going to endure. But the reason here in the U.S. that whatever Biden says is going to be so important and closely monitored is because of what we have coming in the next couple of weeks, the transition of power from Biden to Donald Trump, somebody that he has repeatedly repeatedly said is a threat to democracy. So I think in those ways, this international event hangs over sort of the local dynamics here that is coming to Washington, D.C.
Interesting. CNN's Oren Lieberman's at the Pentagon for us. Oren, the U.S. obviously has a huge military presence in South Korea. All of this is playing out in an already tense region. Is there fear that North Korea might try to exploit this situation?
Well, it appears that North Korea may have been just as surprised as the U.S. by the move from President Yoon here. So the U.S. is watching this situation very closely, and certainly from a military perspective. The Pentagon said just a couple of hours ago that there has been U.S. military to South Korean military communications since this started, so just several hours ago, and it looks like it may already be on its way over. But this is a situation that generally would be right for North Korea to take advantage of it, especially because the South Korean president essentially blamed or said it was, factions or pro-North Korean factions that were trying to take advantage of this or had started this, and this was part of the reason that he declared martial law. So that, it seems, would be a situation that is ripe for some sort of North Korean missile launch, something like the ICBM launch we saw on October 31st, just days before the election here. But so far, the Pentagon saying they're not seeing any force posture changes or any indication of that from North Korea, but that is certainly something the U.S. military is watching very closely, and that is certainly something we are watching closely as well.
Historic political chaos engulfing South Korea as the country's president declares martial law, only to lift the decree just hours later. The turmoil now rocking a major U.S. ally, catching officials right here in Washington by surprise. Our senior international correspondent, Will Ripley, has the latest.
South Korea's biggest political crisis in decades, ending almost as quickly as it began.
친애하는 국민 여러분.
President Yoon Suk-yeol vowing to overturn his surprise declaration of martial law hours after Parliament voted unanimously against it. South Korea's first declaration of military rule in more than 40 years, igniting massive protests in Seoul. Despite months of political gridlock, bitter clashes with opposition leaders, and mounting public frustration, almost nobody saw this coming.
This is an enormous overreaction by the president, to say the very least. But for him to escalate in this way is really, frankly, bizarre.
Chaos outside the National Assembly, inside an emergency session. Parliament voting unanimously, 190-0, to overturn martial law, just 150 minutes after Yoon's shocking order. The vote, a rare moment of unity in South Korea's deeply divided legislature. Opposition leaders described the president's move as an unprecedented assault on democracy.
Tanks, armored personnel carriers, and soldiers with guns and knives will rule the country. The judicial system is suspended, and an emergency martial law regime, where soldiers deliver a summary judgment, has begun.
Veteran South Korean journalist Kenneth Choi says the nation is in collective shock.
Everybody's flabbergasted. The very essence of our democracy is probably come to a halt.
The road ahead, uncertain. President Yoon's popularity was already plummeting. Now, some are calling for him to resign. Underlying issues, political polarization, economic struggles, and public discontent remain unresolved. South Korea's democracy may have withstood this test, but serious questions remain. The immediate question, Wolf, as Asia wakes up on this now Wednesday morning here, is how long can President Yoon stay in office? There are these accusations of treason, these growing calls for his impeachment, and South Korea does have a long history of holding its leaders accountable. 4 former presidents have gone to jail after leaving office in less than 40 years of South Korea being a democracy. Wolf, a lot of people wondering if Yoon is going to be number 5.
Yeah, very serious development indeed with enormous ramifications. Will Ripley, thank you very much. I want to get some analysis right now. I want to bring in CNN's MJ Lee along with our military analyst, retired Colonel Cedric Leighton. We're also joined by Korea expert Victor Cha. He's the author of several books on the region, including his latest entitled, there you see the cover, The Black Box. And Victor, let me start with you. This was a stunningly fast turn of events by a president who's been embroiled in controversy now for some time, as you well know. Why did President Yoon do this?
Well, Wolf, I think the reason he did it was for reasons that we're very familiar with here in the United States: political polarization, weaponization of instruments of government, social media demonization on both sides, that led to complete gridlock in the legislature such that he could get nothing accomplished, including the budget for next year. And then I think in a fit of both frustration and anger, he declared this martial law completely unknown to his own people, unknown to the U.S. government for certain, and creating a lot of ripple effects throughout the region as well as in the U.S. government.
Important point. MJ, you're learning this all took the White House by complete surprise. Take us inside how the U.S. is responding to this crisis in South Korea.
Yeah, this took everyone in the Biden administration by complete surprise. Nobody was expecting this, whether it's the officials here in Washington or even the folks traveling with President Biden in Angola. You know, initially, the first few hours as these scenes were pouring in, clearly the White House was trying to sort of process what was going on, figure out what the White House's official reaction should be. And within the last hour or two, we actually got the first reaction from the White House responding to Yoon agreeing to lift martial law. This is what that statement said from an NSC spokesperson. We are relieved President Yoon has reversed course on his concerning declaration of martial law and respected the ROK National Assembly's vote to end it. Democracy is at the foundation of the U.S. ROK alliance. We will continue to monitor the situation. I should say, Wolf, there has been no substantive and direct response to all of these events from President Biden himself. He really hasn't been engaging the media much while on this trip in Angola, particularly after the pardoning of his son Hunter. But we should say, for context, you know, strengthening the U.S. ROK alliance has been a big part of the president's foreign policy in the region. And President Yoon is somebody that he has had a number of occasions to see. So I do think there's going to be many folks here in the U.S. who are still eager to get that direct response from President Biden.
Colonel Layton, the Pentagon, as we all know, has nearly 30,000 U.S. military troops and other assets in South Korea right now. What will this mean for the U.S. position and for the alliances in the region?
Well, any instability, Wolf, in South Korea, of course, has major ramifications for our Indo-Pacific policies. And when it comes to Korea, it's basically a we will fight tonight kind of scenario that the U.S. forces are basically geared for, and that's a fight tonight against North Korea, of course. So the idea that there's any instability in South Korea kind of takes us back to the early 1980s, where this kind of stuff did happen. And of course, with the new way in which South Korea handles its democracy, that is something that not only the people didn't expect, but neither the South Korean nor the U.S. military expected it either. So it's a major issue for both, and the less stability there is in South Korea, the worse it gets for us to fulfill our policy goals.
And Victor, I wonder if you expect President Yoon of South Korea to be impeached. Where does the country go from here?
Well, it's a good question. You know, I think on the one hand, he did the right thing, which was he declared a martial law. The legislature overruled him. And then after a few long hours, he decided to accede to the legislature. That is constitutionally what he's supposed to do. Ironically, though, even though he did the right thing, I think his future is very uncertain. Whether he'll be impeached or whether they'll have enough votes to impeach him, that's one question in the legislature. The other is whether there'll be street protests that call for his resignation. But you know, he's not in a very good position now. As you said, Wolf, earlier, he was at 10% in terms of popularity already. So the future is quite uncertain for him, even though he probably did the right thing today to save democracy in Korea.
Breaking news, a key U.S. ally erupting into chaos. At this hour, people once again taking to the streets of South Korea after the country's hardline president took a page from Kim Jong-un's playbook and declaring martial law. It was an absolutely stunning move. No one expected it. Stunning and lightning, and it ignited massive protests immediately. Troops stormed the National Assembly as part of martial law. The White House says that the United States, with tens of thousands of troops in Korea, was caught completely off guard. Think about that. The U.S. State Department calling it a serious and grave concern. At the Pentagon, Now, all eyes are on North Korea, watching to see if Kim Jong-un takes advantage of South Korea's most unstable moment in 40 years. Especially concerning because South Korea is home to 30,000 American troops. As we know, Pyongyang has been ramping up missile launches, most recently firing off what it claims is the world's strongest missile, a missile that could one day, of course, the whole point, the whole goal for them is to equip it with a nuclear warhead. South Korean President Yoon is someone President Biden calls a friend, has personally met with 9 times in just the past 2 years. That he's the one who made this move today. And now tonight, the White House is scrambling, monitoring an unfolding, unpredictable and unstable situation minute by minute. As the world watches South Korea, just to the east, Japan scrambling up a Navy ship and surveillance jet after a Russian sub was spotted off the coast of the island near Taiwan. Putin, of course, extremely close to Kim. Both leaders watching the chaos in Seoul play out. And tonight, it is not just the chaos in South Korea. It is, of course, as I point out, most unstable moment in more than 40 years. Part and parcel of an incredibly unstable moment around the world. From Ukraine, where a former top general says World War III has already begun, to mass protests in Georgia and an uprising and mass rebels in Syria. Germany making plans right now to turn buildings into bomb shelters, they've told the public. And all of this, no doubt, will be a test, a major test for President-elect Trump and his incoming administration. Trump, of course, has made no secret his love for Korea, which is facing its most challenging period in decades.
I love South Korea. They're wonderful people, extremely ambitious.
I get along great with South Korea.
I get along great with the people in South Korea.
All about South Korea, of course, has also talked about his love letters from Kim Jong-un and North Korea. Mike Valerio begins our coverage out front live in Seoul, where there is a heavy police presence. I first want to begin, though, with Oren Lieberman standing by at the Pentagon, because, Oren, South Korea, ally doesn't even really describe the tightness of the relationship with the United States, right? And there are 30,000 American troops there right now, which just adds to the holy wow. The Biden administration had no idea this was happening, was totally taken by surprise. How worried are they about this situation now?
If the concern has abated, it has only done so perhaps by a little bit after South Korea's president pulled back on his institution of martial law after several hours. As you pointed out, the move caught the U.S. and realistically probably caught North Korea completely by surprise. It's not just an alliance that goes back decades. As you pointed out, there are nearly 30,000 U.S. troops in South Korea. This is a relationship that goes through military, political, diplomatic, and much more, especially as the U.S. tries to focus on that region. South Korea is a critical part of those plans. To underscore how close President Joe Biden has been with South Korea, he hosted a democracy summit there earlier this year. And this all adds to the difficulty of this particular moment. Now, there haven't been any major changes in terms of the U.S. military. No additional rules or curfews, no force posture changes. The State Department, however, did cancel consular visits and warned U.S. citizens not to go near any demonstrations. And that gives you an idea of the sense of the concern over this moment. As you pointed out, the U.S. is also very closely watching what's happening in North Korea, because this is the type of moment that Kim Jong-un tends to take advantage of, especially because the South Korean president blamed North Korean communists on his reason for instituting martial law. And yet, the Pentagon watching the situation, but no indications yet that North Korea is going to attempt a launch or some sort of action like that, Aaron.